this video, we're going to discuss the factor theorem, remainder theorem, and intermediate value theorem. So let's look at the first problem. So number 1 says to use the factor theorem to determine if x minus 2 is a factor of this given polynomial and to explain your answer. So the first thing is I want you to notice the words factor theorem. That indicates to you a very specific way they want you to work this problem. Now there are multiple ways to figure out if x minus 2 is a factor, or if positive 2 is a 0. We can plug and chug 2 to see if we get 0 out. We could do long division. We could graph it. But factor theorem, using factor theorem, specifically wants you to use long division and use your knowledge of knowing that the remainder, when the remainder is 0, that it is a factor, and when it's not 0, it's not a factor. So remember, when we do synthetic division, it's the 0 that goes in the box, not the factor. So I'm going to put my 2 in my box. Remember, my coefficients go across here. The first thing you want to check is to make sure that you're not missing something, so that you need a 0 placeholder. So I start with my highest degree and count down 3, 2, 1, and no x. So it's going to be 1, -3, -4, and 12. Okay, so I want to bring that 1 down. So I have 2 times 1 is 2, plus a -3 is -1, times 2 is -2, plus 4 is -6, times 2 is -12, and we did get that remainder of 0. So the answer to this question, the explanation for this question would be yes. X minus 2 is a factor because the remainder is 0. Now, had you not gotten remainder 0, you would have simply said no. X minus 2 is not a factor because r is not equal to 0. Okay. Number 2 says to use remainder theorem to determine the value of f of -1 given f of x. So again, just like factor theorem, remainder theorem is your clue that you need to be using synthetic division. So they're requiring you to use a specific method to get credit for this. Okay, so remainder theorem says I'm going to put -1 in the box because we know this is f of x, so x must equal -1. So again, 3, 2, 1, and no x, so I'm going to have 5, -3, 2, and -9. So I'm going to bring my 5 down, times -1, plus -3 is -8, times -1 is 8. 8 plus 2 is 10, and -1 times 10 is -10, and I get -19. And remainder theorem simply says that the remainder, when doing synthetic division at the value of x, is the value of the function at x. So that means f of -1 is equal to -19. So this would be the appropriate work for this problem, but there's no reason that you should turn this problem in not knowing if you got it right. Okay, you could plug this into your calculator and go to your table where x is -1. For the purpose of this video, I'm going to just plug in. So I have 5 times -1 cubed minus 3 times -1 squared plus 2 times -1 minus 9. So -1 cubed is -1 times 5 is -5. -3 times a -1 squared, which is going to be a +1, is -3. 2 times -1 is -2, and I didn't do anything to my minus 9. Okay, so I have -5 minus 3 is -8. From left to right again, -8 minus 2 is -10, and -10 minus 9 is -19. So you can see that they match, which is what we expected. Number 3. So part A says to use the intermediate value theorem to determine if there is a 0 on the interval for the function. So remember, intermediate value theorem says that if we plug in an a and we plug in a b, so our interval a, b, and my y goes from positive to negative or negative to positive, the only way that could happen is if it crossed the x-axis. And if it crosses the x-axis, that's how we get the zeros for functions. X-intercepts, zeros, roots, they all represent the same value when the function touches the x-axis. So I'm going to find f of -1. So I have -1 cubed minus 2 times negative 1 squared minus 8 times negative 1. Negative 1 cubed is negative 1. Negative 1 squared is 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. And negative 1 times negative 8 is a positive 8. And negative 1 minus 2 is negative 3. And negative 3 plus 8 is a positive 5. So then I'm going to find f of 2. That's 2 cubed minus 2 times 2 squared minus 8 times 2. 2 cubed is 8. 2 squared is 4 times 2 is negative 8. And negative 8 times 2 is a negative 16. 8 minus 8 is 0. And 0 minus 16 is a negative 16. So we did have a sign change. So we can say yes. There is a 0 between negative 1 and 2 because, how do we know